All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's Med Mentor Monday on how to find mentors and ask for letters of recommendation. Right now, I'm sharing my screen to show the Med Mentors at UCLA flyer. Since today we're talking about finding mentors, we want to plug our own program, which is a great way to find med student mentors. All of our resources are free and all of our advising is free. So please take advantage of any and all of the resources that you will find helpful. We're all DGSOM medical students of different years, and you can sign up for our events by visiting our website or any of our social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as our link tree that I'll be posting in the chat. But some of the events we have are panels like this, Med Mentor Mondays, where we go over different topics. We have coffee chats that are held once a month, and we have one coming up on Wednesday at the medical school. Anyone is welcome to attend, although, of course, people who live in LA, that will be easier for you guys. But there's going to be free coffee, free tea, and it's just a really casual opportunity to talk to med students. So that's this Wednesday, 3:15 to 4:15 p.m. at Geffen Hall, and you can learn more about that on our social media and on our website. We'll be opening up our application essays feedback initiative soon for those who are applying to med school this cycle and want some feedback on their personal statements. We also have one-on-one advising. If you'd like to meet with a medical student and just have a one-on-one Zoom conversation to get more specific advice about your situation. And then lastly, we've been doing this new program called Jumpstart Clinical Skills, where we try to host sessions like ultrasound workshops or simulation center workshops where undergrads and other pre-meds who have graduated college can come and learn some clinical skills before you start medical school. So please take advantage of these resources. They are for you. And so already within the first 5 minutes, we've talked about a way to find mentors. So let's get started. I will stop sharing and then I'll let my panelists introduce themselves. So you guys just want to say your name, your year, what program you're in, where you're from, and then if you took any gap years and what you did during those. So we'll start with Ryan.
Hello, everyone. I'm, I guess, in the grand scheme of things, a PhD 2 in the MD PhD program. So that puts me at year 4 of an 8-year program, given the old curriculum. I went to undergrad at UC Berkeley, did a double major with electrical engineering, computer science, and bioengineering. Very much pivoted gears as I came to UCLA. I took a gap semester, which in my opinion was the perfect length because it was enough to have a little bit of reprieve from hardcore studying before the next phase of hardcore studying, and I could just dedicate 100% of my efforts to research. But it wasn't so long that I felt like I was getting out of touch with my studying habits and whatnot. I don't know if there's anything else I was supposed to mention. Cool.
And I'm Wes. I'm a first-year medical student. I'm also in the MD PhD program. I went to UCLA for my undergrad and I'm from San Diego, so very SoCal. I took 3 gap years and I worked here at UCLA, did some clinical research in that time. And I also think that having a few years of gap years is nice. I think actually going straight through or off, there's a lot of benefits to either. For me, it was really nice because it progressed some my academic research career and also was a little time away from studying. So that was a nice break. Yeah, hopefully this is a helpful session to everyone.
All right, and my name is Julia. I went to Emory for undergrad, and I did not take any gap years, went straight through. I'm also in the MD PhD program, so we have a stacked MD PhD panel tonight. But that's good because we all have great mentors that helped us get where we are today. So let's just get it started. The first part of the session we want to talk about is finding mentors. So I guess I'll ask the panelists just reflect on some key mentors you had on your med school journey. These can be med students. These can be other peers that you had. These can be research mentors, faculty that you ended up asking letters of recommendation, and also physicians or any healthcare professionals that helped guide you. So I guess the first question is, how did you find mentors and what resources did you use to find them?
I have a ton I could list, but I'll try to list a few ones, and hopefully some that are different than what you expect. I'd like to say, like, my first mentor, I think this is easily forgotten, like mentorship, we talk about, and like as this longitudinal process, and it's important to have a great connection and yada yada yada. But my first mentor was actually just a stepdad of a friend back in high school who just said, hey, like, you like science, you should check this out. It's a volunteer program at the hospital. And he was a doctor. And he's like, you should check this out. I think you'd like it. We had chatted a few times, and he was a doctor. And I was like, oh, that sounds cool to me. And that really set me off on like the medicine journey, is volunteering there. And I just kind of want to highlight that there's also mentorship that comes in really different forms than like a prolonged mentor. And it's someone who is always just there, like will push you a little bit here and there and has ideas. And that's just a very valuable thing. And don't discount that. If you bump into a even a non-physician, but someone who likes science and is like, hey, like, I have an idea, you should try it. That's always really important. And that can be actually what sets all of this right for you, is someone who just cares about you and giving you a little push here and there. On the other hand, I would say this might be like a really obvious mentorship experience, but I found that being in a lab and working closely with many of the people in the lab, from graduate students up to my the PIs, principal investigators, who are the heads of the lab, if you're not really familiar with the lab lingo. All those relationships it's people who are training you, teaching you. They get to learn how you like to learn. They see where what you would do well and like what your skills are. And so certainly value building those relationships with them when possible, and understanding that they're generally there to support you, and you kind of get to know if you're building good rapport with them. And they'll often, if they're telling you not to do something, it's usually comes from a good place. They're trying to support you and not maybe burning yourself out, etc. So I think those are just like two classical examples of mentors. I have more, but I'll let Ryan hop in here too.
Yeah, I can, I guess, cover some other types of mentors. So I am very fortunate to have both parents in the medical field. My father's a physician, my mother is a sonographer. So I think growing up, I was always exposed to medicine, and it was always like a tantalizing potential career choice. The rebel in me wanted to like differentiate myself a little bit and try something else when I was growing up. So it wasn't at the immediate forefront of my mind, but I think just having the constant exposure did make sure that the physician career path was kind of like always there as an option to consider. But I think what I would say was more important for me and more pivotal was just trying to find random seminars to go to when I was an undergrad. So I think the best advice I have for seeking out mentors is be relentless, be like absolutely willing to throw yourself into the deep ends, to talk to people who you think like are out of your like mentor league or whatnot. The reason I say that is because I decided to skip class in sophomore year, which I will not necessarily condone, but I skipped class in sophomore year to attend a lecture by Dr. Mikhail Anwar, who is a UCSF radiation oncologist, MD, PhD, who came to give a talk at Berkeley about microelectronics for cancer research and therapy. And at the time I was struggling with, okay, I know the medical path is a thing. I know the like research path is a thing. I feel like I'm going to have to choose between these at some point. And just attending his lecture pretty much was a lightning bolt to my brain that said, okay, this is what you want to do in the future. I pivoted, of course, a little bit from that henceforth, but I decided, I'm going to go talk to him afterwards. He's this massive head honcho, like amazing clinical work, amazing research work, but I'm going to go talk to him, put my name out there. I got his contact information, emailed him. Long story short, essentially in a couple months, I was working in his lab. And he was willing to mentor me both on the research side as I was developing algorithms for imaging, but also on the clinical side, say, hey, come shadow me like a clinic every week or so during the summer. And if I hadn't decided to skip class, which again, I shall not necessarily condone, but like, I think the idea is, look for opportunities, seminars, talks, whatever, where you can find people. If I hadn't decided to do that, and B, put myself out there at the very ends, even though it was nerve-wracking as all get out to talk to like this really esteemed, well-established PI, say, hey, I'm interested. I know nothing, but I'm interested. Those two things I think are the recipe that's going to allow you to make connections. And I will say that you are not guaranteed every time. Like it is kind of like a cold calling situation where you put yourself out there and sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But I think make sure that you find as many opportunities as possible of anything of remote interest to you, whether it's clinically related, research related, extracurricular, whatever it may be. And you'll be very surprised at how rapidly you can find people that share interests with you. So I would say those are the two big mentors that I've come across in my life, number of, but also be in that list too, but I'll turn it back to Julia or Wes.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, these can be people you know in your regular life, like Wes was talking about, family, friends. These can be random scientists that you approach. What advice do you have for people who maybe aren't as confident about walking up and saying, hi, my name is, like, what is maybe like an intro script you can use either in an email or like going up to a random professor to say, hi, like, please mentor me?
I think, it's challenging, and I really agree with what Ryan said, is you have to be willing to throw yourself out there a little bit. I think if you're not a super loud person, that is okay. It's a very much like an okay thing. But you do have to be brave, I would say, and you have to be willing to get rejected. I think that's a lot of things in just everything. And in medicine, you have rejection and being wrong. These are very important learning tools. I think a really good script, at least for like how I talk to people now about reaching out to, say, like faculty advisors, like a professor, or to join a lab, or just really anything, is, you approach, like, you have to give a reason, just be honest. Say like, hey, like if you're looking for mentorship, say, hey, I'm looking for a mentor, and I just saw, there's usually a reason you're choosing that person. Maybe you like them, the way they teach their class. Be like, hey, I think you're a really great educator. I'm looking for mentorship, and because I want to be an educator later in my career, and I just really love the way you teach me, and I'd love to maybe just chat with you over coffee or something like that to build a relationship. I think the same can be applied in any aspect. You need a reason. You don't want a mentor that you don't know why you want them to mentor you. And so I think just being bluntly honest about why you value them, it will be a compliment. People will like it. And if they're ready to take someone on, they'll say yes. And they might, just because you're honest and approach them, recommend you to someone else but you have to take that chance.
Yeah, 100% agree. I would piggyback on that with saying that I think communicating your genuine interest is of utmost importance, because a lot of mentors, especially, and I'll talk about this in sort of seeking a research position opportunity, just because I think that might be where a lot of you would be looking during undergrad or afterwards, or like postbac or whatnot. But I think when you're looking for a research position, there are so many faculty, and I can say this because I'm on the other side now and I see from my PI all the emails that she has and whatnot. But there's so many students who come saying, hey, I'm interested in your lab, I want to come work here. I took this class and whatnot, really interested. And that's all really well and great. But I think you want to make sure that you're communicating some sort of personal and vested interest. And it's really because, PIs can smell a mile away, like someone who's seeking just to sort of pad a resume. And that's not to say padding your resume is a bad thing, but you'll have greater success in acquiring mentors if you have a personal vested interest in the project. You can communicate that. I think the other thing also, and I guess maybe I'm deviating a little away from the question right now, as opposed to like the nerves part, but I think your goal when you are trying to reach out to people is to make their lives as easy as possible. And the less work they have to do, the more likely they're going to give you what you want. And this applies to anything in life. So if you can make their job easier, if you can say, I've reached out to like some students in your lab, they talked about some of these projects I've found these really interesting. I've taken these trainings as part of my other, onboarding for something else. The more you can sort of show that you are ready to hit the ground running and make their life easier, the more likely they're going to take you on. And part of that is voicing commitment. I think a lot of people, when you're, say, looking for a new lab or a new position or a new shadowing opportunity, it's kind of tentative, like, oh, I think I could make maybe like once a week for an hour. And that's entirely fine. But you want to communicate that the longitudinal commitment you're willing to put in is going to be worth their while. Because for you, you're looking for an opportunity to gain experience and gain mentorship, but it's a bi-directional street. And for them, they're going to want to have people who can sort of push their own work along, or allow them to sort of instruct other people and whatnot. So long story short, I think whenever you're reaching out to people, certainly try to include elements of preparedness and giving an idea of what your commitment would look like. To return a little bit more to the question, sorry for that deviation about nerves. I think starting with email can be a really nice way, because it's a little less sort of face-to-face personal. I think that's how most people start. You send an email to a number of professors or whatnot, asking for an opportunity to work with them. And if you get a response, fantastic. If you don't sort of just like roll over with it, because a lot of professors sometimes just like don't reply. So just follow it up, like go to their office hours or go to their office, and that commitment itself is going to speak volumes. So if you're nervous, definitely start small and then work your way up. But certainly I think, as Wes was saying, bravery is going to be a big part of it eventually. Yeah.
That's great. And I also think you can always kind of start with someone, and then maybe if they're not the person who has the capacity to help you, you can always ask them if they have suggestions for people to talk to. I've done that before when I was trying to figure out what labs to rotate in when I started my PhD. Just found a professor who was already teaching one of our classes, and then she sat down with me and said, talk to this person, and kind of gave me the inside scoop. So there's layers to mentoring. There's some mentors that you'll have for your entire life. There's other mentors that you might just have one meeting with them and then maybe never again. But take what you can get. And again, it is about just asking for help and not being afraid to reach out. And then one more thing I'll add too is, especially for research experience, don't feel like you have to have experience before you reach out to a mentor, because a lot of times you don't. You're maybe starting your first year of college, you've never done research before. In that case, it's always good to maybe attach what you do have, your resume, some things that you're involved in, write a blurb about why you want to work with them or why you're interested in their work, and try to make it specific. And then, yeah, like Ryan said, email widely, because you'll probably get ghosted by a lot of PIs. And you can always resend the same email again, or maybe even a third time if they didn't see it, like a week or so later, to really shoot your shot. All right. So next we're going to transition to the second part of that finding mentors question, which is once you have a mentor that's solid, how do you maintain that relationship? And how do you communicate with them, set expectations, and really make the most of that mentorship?
I'll give two answers. One, I think, because this is mentor we talked about is there's two. There's one to just mentor you, and I think there's someone who you build a relationship with, and they're mentoring you because you're working for them, either in a lab or in some other sense. And I think those are two slightly different answers. So briefly for the first one, if you're working in a lab with someone, communication, et cetera, it's all clear. And there's always going to be issues in maybe how you perform or something like that at some point. So just ensuring that you reaffirm your commitment to the group and understand that it's a two-way street, just like Ryan mentioned, whether this is a job or anything else. And I think that relationship can build itself naturally, so long as you're professional and really committed to it. If you feel like you're in an opportunity where it's someone who could be a great mentor to you, make sure you show that. Make sure you commit to it and give it the time it deserves, and maybe the responsiveness it deserves, and don't let it just be something that you do to do, because I think the mentors will see that and they won't. They'll give you the same. They'll give you mentorship, but not quite to the same level. So if it's someone who you'd really value their mentorship, for whatever capacity that is, make sure you show commitment. I think on the other side, it's almost the same, but the distinction in following up with someone who is just maybe a passive mentor, someone who's just really offered to kind of guide you here and there, is I personally ask for this if I have I do like the alumni mentor thing at UCLA. And this is what I do when I'm working with someone is if you're the mentee, you should be the one reaching out and following up and handling kind of a lot of the organization. I think that's really appreciated. So I always do that if I'm trying to meet with faculty or work on things because they're busy and they'd like to give you their time, but it's asking for two things if you're making them like say schedule for you. It's asking for them to take time to schedule and sort it out, and then for them to give you that time. Whereas if you're like really on it with them and you follow up, you give thank yous, you go, hey, like you said, you could meet at this time. Does this work? I can set up a Zoom. I'm happy to come meet. I think little facilitating things like that really just help you build that relationship. I'm sure Julie and I can talk about other aspects of building the relationship, but I think those are small things that really go a long way. And everyone can do easily. It's just about respect and respecting that they're giving you a lot. And this is the two-way part in kind of that volunteerism mentoring.
All right, just to make sure I got the question, I was entering a question in chat. That was how to like maintain a relationship and sort of make it grow in the mentoring. Okay. Yeah, everything Wes said is absolutely spot on. And I think the key part I would emphasize in my response from earlier would be that helpfulness aspect, which Wes was talking about, like volunteerism and whatnot. You know, a lot of PIs and faculty are extremely busy, and a simple thing is, you know, sending a Zoom link when a meeting time has been arranged can like make sure it can be the difference between meeting them and having future meetings after that, or not meeting them and then just over the course of email threads just being lost in sort of like the masses. So I think, you know, little small things like that that show initiative are going to be really helpful for establishing yourself. And over time, those small things will accumulate into their perception of who you are and your work ethic. And as long as it's all sort of amalgamating into this really nice idea of like, this is a person who's committed, they're like on top of their stuff, they're competent, they're going to go that extra mile, all of that is going to integrate into their perception of you. And eventually they're going to start giving you more and more time. So I think the helpfulness aspect is super key there. I think communicating expectations, which I think was part of the question as well, is really, really important because, you know, there are many relationships in a mentor setting where you as a mentee walk in expecting, okay, I want to be trained, I want to do like these things, eventually maybe to start my own project or whatnot. And from the mentor side, perhaps they're looking for someone to say help a graduate student with their research projects or get a certain set of organization in a lab or order reagents or whatever it might be. And so it's sometimes a scary topic to bring up because as a mentee, there's like a perceived hierarchy difference. Like this is someone who's above me with authority and I can't like, dare I talk back to them or have something different. But I think from the mentor side, if you go into this saying, you know, here are the things I'm hoping to get out of it, or I would like to get out of it, it's going to show them that you're approaching it from a very mature mindset. And I think when engaging that conversation, always make it the bi-directional sort of two-way street in the sense that here are the things that I would like to get out of an experience, whether it's maybe like training in wet lab work, learning how to deal with mice, etc. What things are you hoping for me to be able to help with on sort of the lab front, or, you know, it doesn't have to be lab, maybe it's on the clinical front. If you're shadowing, like how can I help with facilitating like patient care, and even if it's as simple as like bringing a clipboard from the waiting room or something. So I think whenever you have those conversations, it's always going to be a little scary, but when you frame it as like a, I help you, you help me kind of thing, I think that is the key that's going to really make everyone feel like it's a collective effort.
That's great. Yeah, it's really about enthusiasm and like bringing that willingness to work hard and try, and then you'll get a lot in return if it's a good mentor. I know that we as MD PhD students love our research mentors. What about physician mentors or other mentors in healthcare? Like, how did you find those? Because sometimes they can be a little bit harder to like cold email because of, I don't know, the kind of gate of the hospital. And how did you even find doctors to talk to, maybe if they weren't in your family already?
I think one thing that I hear people do frequently, and I don't think this is a bad idea, is you know, if you have a primary care physician or you ever go to the doctor People, I do know many people that that's kind of their first intro. They were interested in medicine. They went to a physician and they just spoke to him about like, hey, can you give me any advice on who I should contact or something like that? And sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But I think maybe that's a more ubiquitous example, which is why I gave that. I think maybe more in general, something that I have done and would recommend is it takes a little bit of practice, but if you're affiliated with like a university or some other academic institution, like where you might like to work, like you kind of have to pick and choose. So sometimes it's hard to just like randomly reach out. But for like me here at UCLA, what I'll do sometimes for people is I'll look into the field they're interested in, and I look at physicians who are listing a bunch of research, educational, or like community involvement opportunities. And that generally means that they're there as an educator and a mentor to someone, and they kind of valued as being involved in more than just their clinical practice. And that's someone who can be worth giving a cold email to. It doesn't always work, but sometimes seeing that they're putting effort into kind of being involved can just be a sign to you that, hey, maybe if I email them, they'll at least shoot me an email back. I know that's not really a perfect answer, and it is challenging. I think to sometimes cold find a physician who can really give you advice. But I do think that's a part of why the med school process often values obviously like shadowing, but being involved in a few medically related things. Part of that, I think, is encouragement to get exposed to healthcare professionals. And it certainly doesn't have to be a physician. I think your path on medicine, even if you want to be an MD, you can be mentored by an RN, an NP, a PA. I think they understand medicine very well, and more so than an NP understands medicine better than I do. So also don't forget that there are like many roads to being a physician, and it's all about healthcare. And sometimes that mentorship, you might feel like you need physician guidance, but that's what mentors is for. But there are resources like this that can help you with like application and some of those processes. And sometimes people like us or the online things are going to be better for the application part because we're so close to it. Whereas like learning about healthcare and your place in healthcare can come from a huge variety of people. So don't forget about that too, because it is challenging to just meet a physician if you don't have an easy way in. So don't forget, there's a lot of other people who can give you great guidance.
I'll talk a bit about networking. So I think, I will acknowledge I come from a place of privilege in the sense that because my father is a physician, I have access to a number of people through him. But honestly, I think the only help that I got through that is when he connected me with one person who has ideas on how interviews go. And so when I was practicing for interviews for med school, I just did sort of like a little chat with that person. But I think everything else was actually from me attending like seminars and finding random people to talk to. So Dr. Anwar from UCSF, that was from attending a seminar in sophomore year of college. I think now that I'm in med school, during my PhD, actually, I just attended a couple of seminars for the neurosurgery interest group. And there was an attending who came afterwards saying like, hey, we're looking for people who might be interested in doing research. Shoot us an email if you're interested. And I did, and now I'm working with one of the neurosurgery attendings, as well as like ENT residents, neurosurgery residents. And so I think, putting yourself out there in those opportunities and then just listening in for people who are advertising positions or interests like that is a really key way to go. I think the other thing that I've heard a lot of is you find someone in your network who knows other people in their network that are related. So I think, maybe you've heard of that little tree idea where it's like you can calculate how many people your a PI or given faculty member is like removed from someone famous like Isaac Newton or something, like how many degrees of freedom it is. I look at that as, the network of humanity. Everyone has access to someone else that is from perception very far away, but actually it's maybe just one phone call or two phone calls away. And so maybe you don't in your immediate circle know any physicians or people that are directly involved in medical care, but if you know someone who knows someone in that regard, you can extend it down further. it really doesn't take too much to just ask that person, say, hey, I was wondering if you have anyone in your network who maybe does work, if you're interested in a specific field of medicine, in this particular thing or whatnot, and then they can sort of pass that word along. Because I think that is probably where the lion's share of a lot of things come from, just sort of word of mouth networking. There's a famous phrase my dad tells me a lot. It's these days, it's not about what you know, it's about who you know, which as I have grown older, I've come to realize is very, very true. So definitely reach out when you can.
Yeah, and another thing I'll add, not only do you have to physically be in the same place as a mentor, but like me now with Zoom and everything, you can always reach out to people across the country that you may be interested in talking to, or even if you're not a student at, say, UCLA, a lot of our seminars and things are broadcasted as webinars. A lot of people will sometimes just cold email people on LinkedIn. That gets a mixed response, but I've definitely been the recipient of those sometimes. Like, I want to learn about MD PhD, and I saw you're an MD PhD student. So, I mean, it's really about just trying, and seeing what sticks. And also, some colleges have career centers and other opportunities to connect with alumni or different events like that. So just keep an eye out for really any opportunity to connect with people. All right, so we'll be switching now from finding mentors and maintaining mentors to talking about a question that's very popular, especially for those starting to apply to med school or applying to internships or other programs where they need a letter of recommendation. So I guess we'll start, maybe it's helpful to give examples of who you all asked for letters of recommendation, and also really how you asked for them. We'll start with that.
So I can start. I'm an MSTP student, and I applied MSTP only. And so I think one highlight to that is you have to have a letter from all your research mentors. So that kind of, depending on how many experiences you've had, adds a lot of those. And so I had a few of those for PIs that I was or had been working with. And approaching that, I think, is fairly simple. It's kind of, they really understand the process, and I think that's really an easy ask. You reach out, and definitely way ahead of time, like 2 months is a nice ahead of time before you want your primaries to go in. If you have I have one of my PIs I'm really close with, and he was like, you can ask whenever. So that all depends, but professionally approach it with a way ahead of time. For other letters, I had one from, they always recommend to have someone from like a non-science background in the application. So I had one of my literature teachers in undergrad, who it was a cool class, and he just liked to chat, and like a couple of us would go to his office hours and chat with him, and I was just like, hey, I'll probably ask you for a letter at some point. I know we didn't build like a relationship where we worked together forever, but I talked with him over the years and just kind of kept him updated and let him know, like, I just appreciate if you could highlight this side of me that is different. And I think that's fine too. I think honesty is really important. I never really went to a professor who was like, hey, like, let's be best friends. Oh, and now I want a letter from you. I think you can be honest and say, hey, I value you and I really enjoy your coursework, and I hopefully you see me as like a good student. And if you could give me a letter just because from what you see about me, and I could tell you some more, I think that'd be great. That's like one option. And then I had the others were from one science professor who I had them for a couple courses. And so similarly there, you have them enough, you build a relationship, you get to know them, and reach out with, I think with these, I'd ask like maybe 3 or 4 months ahead of time, because they're not as connected to you potentially. And so you just want to give them plenty of time. And then lastly, I had a scholarship advisor. And I think like that just fits into a category. If you're going to have so many other connections, whether you do a volunteer thing and you work with like a faculty advisor for it. If you've got like a scholarship, sometimes you have like someone who like checks in with you frequently. If you worked out at like an intern thing, maybe there was a recruiter, like a connection sort of thing there, and that you've maintained a relationship. I think all of those are really valuable to ensure you're just reaffirming and building rapport with over the years after, because if it was a good opportunity then, it might be a good opportunity for you anyways. And there's someone who was involved in a process of you being selected for something. So they saw value in you, and then they saw you act on that value. And they probably saw you grow as a person as well. So they have a nice story to tell. They can say they saw you and picked you, mentored you a bit, watched you grow, and see you now, and they're connected to you. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways we can find people who can give us letters of recommendation, and it doesn't have to just be faculty, teachers, or your actual PIs for research, or even just like your bosses. I think there's a lot of other ways you can have a very good professional letter of recommendation, and it's just about you ensuring you maintain nice relationships with people who saw value in you.
Yeah, I guess since MD PhD requires a lot of lab oriented letters, or at least one. I had, I think, 3 actually from different PIs that I had worked with during undergrad. So for that, I think 2 of them, all 3 of them asked me to sort of like provide a draft. And I think that's not an uncommon thing that you would encounter. Because not only does it allow you to give them an idea of what things you want emphasized, but it gives them some starting material so that they don't have to like start from scratch. So I definitely recommend if you are looking at someone as a potential letter writer, to offer to have a draft or bullet point list or something just to help sort of facilitate their own writing if they agree. Because that, again, sort of in the spirit of making their life easier, it's going to be helpful. I think another strategy that I took, which I know other people have taken as well, is perhaps, and this probably, I think this applies to one of the questions I was asked earlier, in the sense that sometimes, you're part of a massive class, like in Berkeley, that is part of the chemistry class, there are like 500 to 1,000 people, like in a single class. And it's really hard to, make yourself stand out or have a one-on-one sort of like first name basis with your professor when you're like 999 other students in there. So I think in that regard, leverage the fact that there are usually small sections that those large classes have with, say, a grad student or like I forget what they're called, GSR or something. Someone who in a smaller setting can speak to, your inquisitiveness, your competence, your ability to ask questions and think carefully. But someone who also has connections to the PI, or in this case, maybe an instructor of the course, because then you can have the person who's very familiar with your work write the majority of the letter, and then you can request them to have the instructor co-sign it. And so I did that with a number of things. I think there was a mechanical engineering class I took where I was like very close with the graduate student instructor that I had, but the professor kind of knew me just maybe based on a project presentation. And so both were very much willing to put their name on the page, but it was the graduate student instructor who actually wrote the lion's share of that letter. So I think, it's always useful to think, who is going to be most well positioned to write about you from a knowledge point and like working with you closely. And equally important to that is, are there people that can speak to different facets of who you are as a person, or your career objectives, or outside of career, just like as a genuinely good person? Because if you have 10 letters all saying, this person can pull long hours in lab and, do PCRs like no tomorrow, great, like people will eat that up. But sometimes it's nice to have things that can speak on this, the medical compassion for patients, or involvement in an extracurricular that you are really passionate about. So always good to try to balance things out. And certainly, as Wes said, ask well in advance, because inevitably people will have to be very busy, and it can be stressful if you're asking for 5 letters a week left. So definitely try to balance it all out. Sure.
Yeah, in terms of the timing, it's really the earlier the better, and you can always drop hints along the way. So for me, I had 2 letters from research mentors, and then I had 2 from science faculty, actually, which I actually didn't even realize that it's recommended to have a non-science letter. I think it really depends on the program and the school. So at least for MSTP, they really do value those research mentor letters. And then my two professors that I was closest with and who I had gone to office hours a lot and they knew me by name. I went to a much smaller school than UC Berkeley or UCLA. So had the privilege of, having more like close relationships with professors. Those are the people I asked for my letters, and I took their classes freshman, sophomore year. So it was just a matter of kind of keeping them in mind and keeping in touch with them, kind of just sending an email once a semester, once a quarter. Hey, I'm still interested in MD PhD. I'm doing research in this lab. Like, hope you're doing well. And you can always find other ways to kind of just touch base with them if you see them at a conference on campus, a poster session, or maybe even get to TA their class later. There's a lot of ways to try to keep that relationship going. And so again, timing, ask early, but Wes was saying at least 2 months in advance, give them a heads up. And then of course, provide something. Some of them don't want you to provide an example letter. Some of them do, like Ryan said. At the least you can do is give them a CV. You can always, if you're applying for some sort of summer program or application that requires essays or little short answers, you can always give them a copy of your drafts of that. Again, just giving them an idea of like, this is the story I'm trying to tell, and they'll know like kind of how to frame their writing. And then kind of went over those other tips to make their task easier. Now, what about challenges? What about if you have a letter writer who you asked and they agreed, but then they totally go MIA? How do you follow up with them, or how do you remind just normal letter writers when the thing is due?
Sorry, could I backtrack? There was one thought I had with the last question. I apologize, I forgot to mention it. But I think in the grand scheme of things, when you're trying to find your letter writers, ideally you want to have sort of those longitudinal relationships that Julia was talking about, where if maybe you took a class early on in the undergrad curriculum, you keep in touch with them. And I think part of that is also, even if there's a class where you're like, okay, this isn't part of my pre-med requirements, this isn't like directly related to one of my personal interests, it still will benefit you in the long run if you still like try to go above and beyond. I know, time is finite, effort is finite, energy is finite. So certainly allocate your resources as you see fit, and the priorities should receive the lion's share of those things. But there was a class, I think it was called Rhetoric 1A, Italian Studies, where we literally just watched Italian movies and wrote like essays on them. But I decided I wanted to write like a really detailed essay on the uncanny valley for the movie Chappie. Sorry, that's a tangent. Long story short, the professor remembered that essay 3 years later. And I did kind of like see this professor every now and then on campus and like wave hi, but I never really kept up with emails. And that was the person who actually wrote my non-science recommendation letter. And he showed it to me afterwards, and it was, dare I say, probably the most glowing recommendation letter I've ever seen, at least related to me. So I think it just goes to show that anytime you're taking a class, or even if it's not the most directly related to things of your personal interest or future career, still try to put in that extra effort, because it can yield massive dividends down the road. But I'll pitch it back to Wes with relation to the difficulties and challenges with letters.
And I think you'll probably encounter them if you do ask for letters. That's really a big part of why we say the 2-3 month thing. It's one of the big aspects to it is hopefully your mentor who you're asking it from. And that's why I say maybe 3-4 months for those who are faculty you're not as close with, who are just faculty, and who aren't as close with you. So they're going to see you less often and feel maybe just less obligated, like less pressured. Because if you're even at a big school, but at a small school, whatever it is, you're not the only one they're probably writing a letter for, unless it's kind of like a really niche person you're asking for. If they teach a lot of students, odds are someone else asks them too. Maybe they have 1 or 2 others to write. And if they have a lot of other things, it can really just back up and they can get behind. So I would really say like asking way ahead of time. Like Ryan said, if, you know, they're your faculty and they are happy to have you draft, I think that's great. And I think doing it far enough ahead of time gives you opportunity to really gently remind and ask for updates. Whereas if they go AWOL and say you're a month out, but you asked 2 months ago, it's really easy to send an email and be like, hey, you know, I'm just checking in. I'm going to submit in a month, and like technically you don't need your letter in when you submit either. It can come a bit after, so it gives you even more buffer. But I think really smart to just like have them in when you submit. And you can say, hey, like I'm love to, or I know that you're probably busy. I just want to check and see how this is, and you know, I passed on whatever, but I'm really, you know, my applications come further along, and if there's more things I could provide, or even just sit down and do coffee with you or something like that to help you, that's great. I really appreciate the time you're taking, and also I know like you still have a month, but I just want to reach out and make sure things are going smoothly. I think if you've given yourself the time, it's easy to like politely nudge. And as you come down to the wire, you can still just send emails. And if you've given yourself enough time, it'll probably happen. I would also just really recommend having one extra letter always. I never submitted with the bare minimum. You never want to submit with the bare minimum to a school. I would just include a little bit extra, because if someone doesn't submit, it's fine. And you know, it's not like your main letter writer is not going to submit. Otherwise, that's a weird choice if that happened. So, you know, you'll have core people who you feel will write your letter, like 2 or 3 that you know are like the really core part. Just have a few of the extras floating around, because you know you can have 10 letters and you're not going to use them all. You don't need that many, but you shouldn't just have 2 or 3 that are really good. You need a bit more to show that you built more relationships, and if it doesn't come through, it doesn't come through.
They would have much original content to add on top of that. It's pretty comprehensive. I guess the only like single tip I might also add on would be, even though you have like a specific deadline dictated by AAMC or whatnot, it doesn't mean you can't tell your letter writers that your self-imposed deadline is earlier than that. So I think the strategy I took was I told my letter writers, okay, I want these letters are kind of like due March 1st. I'm just making up a date, but like March 1st, when in reality, maybe the deadline was actually March 14th, 15th or something. So I gave myself a week or 2 of deadline buffer, because inevitably I actually did have one letter writer who I emailed like a month out. It's like, okay, just like happy to help provide more materials or updates and whatnot. I said, oh, you know, I got it. 2 weeks out, I got it. 2 days out, I got it. 1 day out, I kind of need this tomorrow. It's like, oh, yeah, I'll write it now. And so it was kind of last minute and whatnot. So I never actually experienced like someone reneging on their offer to write a letter, but the fact that in his mind it was only 1 day to write the letter, but in my mind it was like, okay, actually I have 14, was a little reassuring for me. So I think if anything, definitely try to use that trick when you're asked. But other than that, I don't think I have anything beyond what was said.
Yeah, that is a great point. You can totally, lie about the deadline if you want to give yourself some extra time to breathe and have a backup plan. But another important thing that Wes mentioned is you actually do not need to have your letters ready by the time you submit your med school application, because there's a bit of a buffer time when the AMCAS med school application system sends the applications to med schools, because they're verifying things like your transcript and all that good stuff. And so yeah, I think the recommendation is obviously the sooner the better. Try to get it in when you get yours in, but if for some reason there's a delay, don't panic. You can still submit your application and get that part going, which you want to get it going, and then you can wait for the letter writers for a reasonable amount of time. Oh, okay, great. What was the last part? Oh, so of course we have people who take gap years and are out of school for a while and really haven't talked to those professors or seen those professors in years. What is the strategy for that? We talked about how to stay in touch, but I guess what recommendations do you have for students who are taking some time off and might not even see those people for before they apply.
I saw something like that in chat, and I'll try to go into it a little bit more here, but I would say all the basic things apply, and we talked about staying in touch, and I think falling out of touch is really normal. We all do that with everything in our life. And honestly, think about it like how you would get back in touch with a friend. Reach out, like if there's someone who you had previously maintained a relationship and felt like would be a good person to write, then you can reach out and just kind of update them on your life and say like you've had a lot going on, and now you're kind of in a place again ready to apply, and you'd like to get in touch with them again and speak and update them on things and see if they value it for that. And on the other hand, if they're not someone you would ever expected to get a recommendation from, I still think that the same approach can be made, and that, I briefly knew you, and I've really grown a lot in my life. And the reason I'm coming back to you right now is because you saw me at a different place, and I'd like to just establish a connection now. I don't know if you remember me, but now I have kind of maybe more to bring to a mentor-mentee relationship. I would say if you're going to be doing things like that, 3 months before submitting isn't really the time to do it. I do think you need to be strategic. If you've stepped out for a few years and you plan to reapply, I think you want to give yourself at least a year. I don't have experience in doing this, so also I wouldn't just trust what I'm saying here. Maybe you need 2 years to really reestablish, but if you are here after a few gap years right now in this meeting, or watching this, think about how much time you have before you'd like to reapply and get on it as soon as possible. We talked about networking and relationships a lot here, and I think it's never too late to try to build those, but you do want to give it the right amount of time to get a good letter of recommendation. And I think if you have less than a year and it's very clear to them why you've reached out in 6 months before an app cycle, there's not much there. But if you reach out a year and are honest about it, I think that is helpful. It gives enough time for them to be like, okay, well, they want a letter of rec. Well, they're going to have to earn it. And then you can see. And also don't expect, on that note, don't expect everyone to want to be willing. I think that's just important to know. Even if you reconnect, even if you like, not everyone's going to be willing. Some people need a certain level of relationship to be willing to take the time to do it. Or they'll tell you, I won't write you a very good letter because I don't know you well enough. And listen to that. That's always important. But yeah, that would be my advice on it, is that you might not get a letter from them. So be thoughtful of who you choose and the effort that you put into that.
Yeah, I guess a piggyback point to that is, I think a recommendation that's pretty common is when you ask for a letter, you want to generally try to ask your writer or potential writer, would you be willing to write a strong letter of rec for me? Because if you don't include the word adjective strong, there's less of sort of an impetus on your writer to really sort of show off and brag about you and whatnot. And especially for people who may not feel as comfortable bragging about either themselves or other people, it won't come as naturally. And so being very specific about requesting a strong letter is, I think, important in that regard. On the subject of reconnecting, I will give the disclaimer that I didn't really experience this beyond sort of that one example I described where I sort of connected with the Italian studies professor after a couple of years. And I think in that regard, I had saved anything from my work in every class that I thought might be like either like sort of stand out in the sense that it was an important project or a big paper or something that I could reference, or if there was a certain discussion or there were activities that we did in class that I found really motivating and inspiring. I would just keep kind of like a little log of those things so that if in case in the future, I hadn't talked to this person for a year, 2 years or whatnot, but I wanted to reconnect and establish sort of a mentor-mentee relationship again, I could reference this and say, oh, hey, I was really enjoying your class. I really actually enjoyed, studying this particular Italian movie. And I had submitted this paper, which I thought was, we had a really good discussion. So just reminding them of interactions that you've had through those references will be really helpful when you start reconnecting. And, I think the point Wes mentioned there at the end that, sometimes people will just find it more difficult to write a letter if they haven't connected with you over the more recent interim. Be willing to work with that if that is the case and have some contingency plans. I think the name of the game with the pre-med application process is always have backups and backups for your backups, even though it becomes more and more overwhelming. Do it though.
All right, in these last couple minutes, I just want to go through some rapid fire questions that we got submitted in advance. Does prestige of your letter writer matter? Like, should it be like very distinguished professor, or should it be someone who, I'm hinting at my answer, knows you best and can write about you best? Because there's a balance. Any thoughts?
I would answer that, you don't really necessarily pick and choose who your faculty advisor is, but yeah, I think knows you best and can write you a good letter is great. I think if that's something you like, I do think just personally, if you are in a lab, you should really be trying to be connected to your PI. Not necessarily their prestige, but like one of my PIs, I worked with a few PIs, and then he and I just built the best relationship, and he has like a lot of prestige in the field. And we have a really good relationship. And that was just in part because I did a lot of work for like that team, and you start to build it. And I would only choose him over someone else because we built that close relationship, not because he's prestigious. He and I were very close. We've, like very good relationship. We're always in contact. And that was fortunate. But I also have many friends who just were like, yeah, I wasn't a huge lab, but I know my PI was like, this is the best letter I'm going to write anyone for a very long time. And that's what's really important, I think, is that connection you build with someone. If they're prestigious, it's great, but you also have to remember if they're big name, they're probably written a lot of letters and they can't say you're their best student. So if you know they're going to write you a really strong letter and they're prestigious, that's great. But other than that, it might take away from you. Someone else might say they're my best student ever. I think there's balance to that.
Yeah, and it doesn't really matter. I saw someone ask about like community college professors or upper or lower division classes professors. I think like you're going to be submitting a mix anyway. So of course you can include those people who you're close with and are good mentors. They do not have to be in your major. I saw a question about that. Another question is like science versus non-science. What is considered science, non-science? Like I know, and I'll say from the get-go, check the school requirements. All med schools have their own kind of different ways of interpreting that. And sometimes they'll be very specific about the letters they want. Sometimes they'll kind of just say, choose your own adventure. Any quick thoughts on that?
Nothing too extreme or different. But yeah, I would just like reinforce the comments made that I think when the letter of recommendation is being read, they're not reading it to see who's the name at the end and what are the 2-letter or 4-letter or whatever combination letter titles that come after that name. It's what is this person saying about this student? Are these remarks consistent with something that we would want in our institution? So I highlight again, it's the closeness of that relationship.
And then another question I really like just to finish this off is how do you actually talk to professors? Like it says, quote, it feels like I'm being fake. What do you talk to them about when you're in office hours, and how do you really, I don't know, start the conversation?
I think the two things are like the professors that remembered me, it was because I was interested in the course and I would try to talk about that and like research that was relevant to the course and just like actually cared about what they're teaching. And I think that's one option. The other is if they just shared cool things about themselves and you just like them and thought they were funny, just go chat about that. Like, I mean, you'll meet all types. You can do both of those two things, but just, I mean, genuine is best. Real interest in someone is best. And, pick whatever works for you, how to be genuine with someone.
Ditto, no original content beyond that.
Great. Thank you both for coming and sharing your insight tonight. And if you guys have other questions, again, check out Med Mentors and we'll be here to help. So thank you all. Have a good night.